on a rainy Sunday morning. This is the fifth session of the course on the Wheel of Life, the Buddha's Wheel of Life. And this is a continuation of the last two classes that were focused mostly on the six realms of mental states. Although two classes ago, we did cover right at the beginning of it, the second circle, the one coming out from the center, three poison circle, which was the positive and negative virtuous activities, which is really important. You know, I always harken back to those two inner circles because it's all connected. It's a dynamic, think of it as an ecosystem that we're living in. So there's always purpose. Well, hopefully the way I refer to it, it's purposeful to harken back to where we've come from in terms of what's going on in today's session. So in the previous two sessions, besides covering negative and positive activities, we covered the God and what they call the jealous God realms. And then last class, we covered the mental states of the human and animal realms. Today, let me just, I think could I share the screen, Gloria?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, I'm just going to share one visual. Hold on.
Do you see the share at the bottom?
Yeah, no, I'm there.
Okay,
I'm just,
good. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't, yeah.
And I'm just picking the window I want to share. It's actually two windows, so I'm going to do a desktop share. You'll see yourselves for a second for a minute, and then I'll put on the visual. So these two images, which we're hopefully all familiar with at this point, one is the more contemporary representation of the wheel, and the other one's what we call a traditional wheel. And it's probably pretty small on your computers for those of you who are on a computer. But essentially what I'm bringing up here is to show us that inner circle again of the three poisons, the positive and negative activities, and then these six realms. And then the two realms that we're going to be addressing are what are called the hungry ghost realm and the hell realms. So they sound like kind of like the most scariest. But if we remember to think about them, and I'll try to talk consistently through this morning within the context of mental states, how are these realms, whether they're represented in this traditional diagram or in the contemporary diagram, how are they representing specific mental states? And in this case, these are the two, if you will, most representative of negative mental states. You know, mental states that we really don't want to be in ultimately. And they're the most challenging in terms of trying to work with them. So we'll talk about what their characteristics are and how we might be able to work with them. Again, that's my goal in trying to present this material in this fashion. How could we relate these mental states to our moment by moment, day by day flow of mental, emotional, you know, and thought, speech, and action experience? And that's essentially, you know, what we got to stay focused on. So I just wanted to bring these up momentarily. They're not, you know, I'm not going to keep them up. Just a reminder for those of you who might not have an image in front of you of either one of these wheels. So the first one we're going to cover is what's known as the hungry ghost realm. And again, that language is traditional to Buddhist cosmology as it's represented in the wheel for a location in the wheel of suffering existence, in samsaric existence, in existence. And this realm is characterized by really a place where if you spend a lot of time here in terms of mental, you know, states of experience, you are definitely accumulating a lot of negative karma. That's a pretty obvious statement. Based on what we've all discussed in previous courses, that should resonate and make sense, really, not just like a one-liner. So I won't go into that much further, but when you connect it all the way back to the origins of our existence, experience in the form of one of or all of the three poisons, and then as either an activated, if you will, either in the context of negative or positive activities, of mind, speech, or body, then you can see what I'm talking about. As those create karmic cause and effect every single moment reality for us. So basically, this is being stuck in a place where the word you're going to hear mostly from me to describe this is craving. So it's a place where one craves voraciously, but you're never, ever, ever satisfied. It just doesn't happen. And it's portrayed in the traditional wheel as a place where it's pretty, pretty graphic, the traditional presentation where you're seeing beings there who are characterized, they're starving. They have tiny mouths and very thin necks and very large bellies. And that symbolizes insatiable hunger. The tiny mouth and the thin neck are more specifically symbolic of not being able to satisfy that hunger. And again, we're not talking about only physical hunger here. We're talking about, negative mental states or mental afflictions. So it's a very appropriate graphic. It's pretty graphic, but it can stick with you if you allow yourself to sort of look at them and just sort of see that what they represent. So, it's essentially a metaphor for some form of addictive personality characteristic, and it doesn't have to be the most obvious forms of addiction, which you might think. So, ceaselessly plagued by hunger, never getting enough of what you crave for, essentially. So that's really that's your snapshot of what goes on in the hungry ghost realm. And in terms of what it indicates when we look at ourselves, and remember that's the big thing I evangelize in this set of teachings, is to find a place where you can individually spend time to look at, turn towards, look at yourself and what your behaviors are. Try to do it dispassionately, try to do it gently, try to do it in a way where you're not beating yourself up when you do see something that you're not pleased with in terms of your emotional or mental afflictive states that you're able to recognize and label as being that's one from the human realm, that's one from the God realm, that's one from the hungry ghost realm. That's always important to keep in the front of your mind, but I do encourage you to turn to doing that sort of reflective work on a regular basis. Ideally, if you could spend a little bit of time each day, and I'm not even necessarily talking about meditation, just even reflecting, maybe something you do at the end of the day. In my earlier days in studying Buddhism, when I worked specifically on turning towards and looking at my own virtuous and non-virtuous activities, a teacher I had early on gave us a daily sort of diary to keep, a tool that we could keep to, at the end of the day, reflect on those 10. Remember, we went over them, two classes ago, those 10 virtuous and 10 non-virtuous activities. And it was done, I'm just going to hold this up, it was done in the form of this thing just called the book. Some of you might notice that there's a flaming sword there with a book. Those are the two hand symbols that are held by the physical representation of Manjushri. In Buddhism, he's the deity of wisdom. So one would, go through this process of keeping a record essentially of your virtuous and non-virtuous activities. Both are important. So like when you look at any of your mental states, and you might do a reflective session in your own way, whether you record it or you just take one that you experienced that day. It's really, I can't emphasize this enough. It's really, really, really important to counterbalance that with something that is a very positive mental experience that you did that day, or an activity, or mental state that you found yourself in, and rejoice in that. That's sort of, not sort of, it's a direct antidote to being gentle with yourself. It's not a trick, because if you're honest with yourself, we're all capable of looking at things that we do. But if we're really good at looking at our mental afflictions, as I've been talking about, evangelizing, so that we can take them into meditation, like we talked about last week, you got to be careful. It's all part of the being gentle, being giving yourself loving kindness, and being proud, and I mean in a good way, of your good virtuous activities. And we all of us have a mix of all these kind of activities every single day, moment by moment. They're just going by so fast that we don't capture them. So you might want to maybe keep a diary, is the word that most of you would be familiar with. I call it this book. I've been doing it for decades. And frankly, that's why, like in the previous sessions, when I've used myself as an example of some of the things I could identify as my own, mental states that I shared with you as examples, right? Unfortunately, they're right at my fingertips, because it's something we all experience. And taking note of it in some form is very helpful. So I won't go on and on about it, but, try to find a place where you're comfortable with doing that activity. And it might be just taking one thing at the end of the day and reflecting on it. Then counterweight that with something really good, positive, virtuous activity, to use the language of that second circle. Rejoice in it. Carry that latter experience to bed with you. Don't carry a negative one with you to bed, unless you're able to then, before you go to bed, take and do a meditation where you bring that mental affliction with you onto the cushion and work with it the way we talked about last week. And there's lots of ways to work with them, but that was one that we talked about last week. And then rejoice in that, and then do a dedication, and then take that into your sleeping state. So working with these kinds of things are not to be taken lightly. It's also not meant to scare you, but it's also to be smart and skillful in how you might bring them into your conscious experience. I think you get, sort of the caution there, and also how to maybe work with it a little bit. And I'm always willing to talk about that more. We could do a Q&A a little bit more about that. Always available to talk about that at another time, even outside the class. So, so the punchline is, as we talk about this realm, in every realm, we've all visited this realm. We probably all visit this realm on a daily basis on some level. And we all visit probably all the 6 realms on a daily level. So, the mindset, as David Nichtern calls it in his book, which is one of our texts that we're sourcing, he's identified this as sort of an insatiable desire for something, for anything, for whatever it is that happens to be your karmic ripening. Maybe you feel lonely or stressed or anxious, and because of that, you compulsively feel like you're going to be able to satiate that, to satisfy that, by drinking or eating or some other sort of personal affirmation that you might get from somebody else. Maybe it's a sexual addiction. It doesn't have to be, by the way, none of these have to be like sort of in the extreme form that we all know some people in our lives who possibly have one or more of these kinds of hungry ghost experiences. They can be moment by moment. Remember that. So we don't have to be somebody who's like really in dire straits to be living at certain moments of the day in this realm. Identifying when you're in that realm and then working with it is really where you can, sort of lift the tide of spending more of your moment by moment reality as you do practice and work in positive mental states or realms of existence. So it's something, when I talk about these things, it's important to remember I'm not just talking about them in the extremes, because you might think then it doesn't apply to you. I don't think that's probably the case. So, and the thing that is most elusive in terms of like how these things cause this kind of behavior, is, I'll put it in one word, being able to reach a feeling of contentment. Contentment is the most elusive experience for a hungry ghost. That's what drives and moves the mind of a hungry ghost experience towards trying to satiate, to try to satisfy the craving. Again, whatever that is. So whenever you're feeling maybe a moment where you are not content, that could be an opportunity to pull back, turn and look at what's really going on, and maybe identify that as, what am I not content about? And then that might cause you to see what that negative mental state is. And maybe you can note it, maybe then you can work with it a little bit, like I've been talking about. The real challenge, though, for somebody who's in this state is to do what I just said. it's being able to turn and see, what that might be. Sorry, a light above my head just went on. I want to just reach up and turn it down. It's too bright. I manually adjusted, so it decided to go on by itself. So really, the irony or paradox of this mental state is that the obstruction to being able to turn and look and identify and say, I'm not content, is the overwhelming, illogical, goes beyond in the moment, not being able to reason that you have that craving. So this is like the tussle, the dance, the difficulty. And this is why sometimes it's important, I think, to have some help or insight or instruction, or essentially you could just pull right back right now and think about, like, well, why are we studying this thing called the Wheel of Life? What's an opportunity in this moment to be able to pull back away from any cravings any one of us might have in terms of talking about this realm, and see that there's a way to step back from it and look at it and analyze it and see it and then do something with it. So, we'll talk a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on. So as I started to say a moment ago, this can really apply to even mild dependencies. I have a major minor, that's a musical term, dependency on caffeine. Every morning, I have a cup of coffee. And I'll be honest with you, I do meditation practices every morning, like really early. And I buzz myself a little bit with some caffeine so that I can focus my mind. I do. So it's not an easy thing for me to deal with. So caffeine, could be nicotine, it could be food, it could be another person. We can have a craving where the dependency on the other person isn't healthy, so it doesn't have to just be a thing. These are all the kind of dependent arising events that go into this realm of the hungry ghost. And as I alluded to earlier, it essentially, David Nichtern in his book calls it a blind, like you can't see, urgency that you just can't deny. At other moments when you're not having that urgency, you could go, oh yeah, I shouldn't drink that coffee, or I shouldn't have another cup, or what. But then when you have to have it, there's you're blind. You just can't see that you shouldn't be doing that, or you should work with it some way to bring it to a place where it doesn't cause sort of a hungry ghost experience, if you will. So again, it doesn't have to be big things. It could be little things. And probably for most of us, thank goodness it is. All of us know people who have really severe, as I've been describing this, cravings, addictions, drug addiction, sex addiction, gambling addiction, food addictions. I mean, addictions that just sort of overtake your life. It's so extreme that you can't be in any of the other realms, almost never. And when you are, it's so infrequent that it's a tough place to get out of. So we're not just talking about people like that. And that's why I want to say, that it's important that we understand that all 6 of these realms, even these 3 so-called negative realms, they apply to all of us. There's no doubt about it. So that's underscored. So we can never get enough of anything. We can't get enough love. We can't get enough money. We can't get enough things. We can't get enough lifestyle fulfillment. We can't be filled. So that's essentially what happens in terms of not being able to reach a place of happiness. Remember, our goal here from a day-to-day, moment-by-moment experience is to be less unhappy, less feeling the experience of some type of suffering, and having more mental states and emotional balance that we truly experience as happiness for ourselves and for others. So the big challenge here is, okay, how do we recognize these cravings? How do we do that? And remember, as David Nichtern said, that blindness is the main obstacle. And I've already given some examples of that, in terms of it not having to be really severe. So I think we could all find for ourselves what that might be. I already mentioned the 6 times book in my notes here. I sort of made a note here that I'd bring that up, but I already brought that up. So essentially, this could be present at any time during the day. And I really encourage you to try to find those. I think probably the 2 realms we're talking about today I'm projecting here on you guys, but probably for most of us, it's the hardest to turn towards, because they are, they get to be on the more intense side of negative emotional experiences. Wait till I get to the hell realms, okay? So essentially, the big problem here is that these constant cravings leave no room for a proper appreciation for the development of having a perspective where you can actually, again, that blindness gets in the way, where you can't grab yourself and pull yourself to a place where there's an opportunity to even use it. So it really upsets our clarity. It's relentless. More than in any other realm, too. This is the realm that what David Nichtern calls the psychology, the experience. He's really talking about our inner experience, the emotional experience. He uses the word psychology. I like to use the word mental states or mental afflictions, because fundamentally they're not emotions. Self-grasping, aversion, misapprehension are mental afflictions. They're not emotions. There's a difference. But this is the realm where the manifestation of negative activities takes the form of real inner psychological, emotional experiences. And as we know, those can be really the hardest to work with. So not only do you have the blindness that I talk about, that's an obstacle, but we have the more subtle reality of the inner experience that is how most of us have this manifest in our lives. It might be external manifestation like my caffeine addiction, but what causes that? Where does that really come from? This is the thing that David's talking about. So filling that void, or lack of fulfillment that I talked about before, is really a big challenge here. So if that's what this is characterizes this realm, and that's what the mindset that David Nichtern calls this, and the problem is this obstacle of blindness. and it even being tougher in the sense that it's more subtle, inner psychology, if you will, of emotional states. How do we find the opportunity? Again, if you've been reading Nick Turn's book, he outlines every one of the realms as like, what are the characteristics? What's the mindset? What is the problem? And then what is the opportunity? He's always, at this point, he's always turning the narrative towards, okay, well, what can we do about it? So this one, I've talked about this the last couple of weeks, getting in the habit of actually developing a practice is like super, super important. We could have it go to like a teaching like this and hear some good stuff and go, whoa, that I can relate to that. That's meaningful to me. I think I can get some insight from that. I think I could learn from that. But all of that is only setting the table for doing the work, doing some sort of practice. In Buddhist practice, there's not a Buddhist class, but the methodology is you try to gain some knowledge from really good sources, like reliable text from the Buddha and from great teachers. You then try to have that disseminated to you by really know what you're talking about. And then from there, you try to reflect on it, contemplate, but then ultimately the work is done on the meditation cushion. So, both myself and David Nick Turn are underscoring the need to really practice. Without practicing, you're not going to be able to cultivate any kind of insight to the object, which is the craving that you might have, and you're not going to be able to start to work with it. With these two realms that I'm talking about today, you're going to hear this theme of like the challenge of actually being able to see what it is that's not on the rails, that's not really a good or a positive mental state. And half of it is really about first just developing a good, strong practice where you use some faith based on what you've heard, based on what you might say, well, I think maybe I could work with that. That might resonate with me. That might make some sense. I might be able to use that. So I'm going to have a little bit of faith and I'm going to try working with it and see if I get some results. So you don't just go on faith. It has to prove itself out. It has to start to work for you. But when it comes to these types of mental states that we're talking about today in these two realms, this is where it really becomes super challenging, frankly. And half the work is just getting over the obstacle of what's blinding us. And then we could see maybe, what those cravings are. So, I just want to, at this time, pull up a couple of important sources that I want to talk about when we talk about, the first order of business is sort of being able to observe and see that we actually have some cravings that we from this realm. So I'm going to turn to just reading a couple of short verses. One that I'll read just here. I'll just read one now right here. This is from the 8 verses on mind training, and it's from the mind training manual I've shown you guys a few times previously. It's the 3rd verse. The 3rd verse says, during all of my activities, I will probe my mind, and as soon as an affliction arises, since it endangers myself and others, he's talking about, not only for yourself, but like your concern for others. Remember how important compassion is here as one of the 2 wings of practice. He says, I will train myself to confront it directly and advert it. So, this mind training, 8 verses of mind training, talks directly about how, don't take my word for it. This is from like a very authoritative source that this is what you have to do. You first have to identify it and then start to work with it. So meditation practices in working with sort of these more severe negative mental afflictions or mental states of mind are the hardest to work with. Otherwise, and I love this, this comes from David Nichtern, he basically says about, in his text about this realm, otherwise, you'll continue the, quote, you'll continue the endless round of desire, chase, acquire, and tire. I love that. I mean, because it does end in being, you're tired, you're exhausted, you're defeated in that repeated experience. You know, some of the meditation practices he talks about, and I've already talked about when we that are really important to working with this particular realm, are where you kind of have to, like I said, go into it with some sense of feeling that you know, you're here, you're getting some instruction about this, you're hearing not just from me, but some other authoritative sources, that it might be worth trying. Because it's really, you know, you do have to make some sort of commitment to do the work. It's not just to feel good, like, as what a cool thing I learned about, and then you go back to just sort of what you're always doing, you know? This might sound sort of severe, and I apologize, but I want to take time out here to just say that for me, and some of you who know me have heard me sort of refer to suffering existence as something that is yeah, it's kind of tough to live in moment by moment, especially when it's misapprehended, misunderstood, and we don't really have a feeling for clarity of seeing sort of through the fog of like what the suffering existence. But I like to refer to suffering existence as, and especially these two realms, as the grace of suffering existence. I use the word grace because I come from a Catholic background, and grace has a very deep meaning. So you might say, like, well, why? Why would I identify it that way? And it's because this suffering existence is exactly the friction that the human psyche, the human psychology, in terms of what makes us up and how we move moment by moment, it's required. Without friction of, oh, you know, feeling some kind of pain, either specific pain, like, you know, getting, you know, punched in the face, or pervasive pain that, you know, maybe permeates your life in some way, like maybe you have chronic depression. These are the opportunities. It's actually the opportunity to work with that moves you. It moves your mind, has the opportunity. You have the opportunity to move your mind from this cycle of desire, chase, acquire, and tire that David Nichtern talks about, to something that is much more positive and brings a happier, healthier state of mind. So it's literally what moves our mind to be in a better moment by moment experience. And that goes all the way back to the three poisons, and how, as we start to do activities that are either positive or negative, they plant those kleshas, you know, those seeds in our conscious flow, moment by moment, of our mind, if you will, and then they ripen. So doing that work of, within that context of experience and the laws of karmic ripening, cause and effect, then you could see how it even logically, and if you will, scientifically, move one in that direction. These kinds of practices can move one in that direction, but it doesn't happen without having the grace of suffering existence, if you will. So I'm just going to read one other source here quickly. This is from Mind Training, Removing Obstacles. And it's just one short paragraph from this set of only 4 paragraphs. And this third paragraph is called Bringing Obstacles Onto the Path. Whatever unhelpful events, such as physical ailments, mental anxieties, and so on, occur, or when adversities afflict you, contemplate, quote, "This is due to my own self-grasping. If today I do not discard this self-grasping, obstacles will continue to arise." That makes sense, right? You want to discard them. But here's the punchline. So may all the adversities in the world, and therefore fears, come to be realized upon me. May this help subdue the self and utterly destroy it. Contemplating thus, bring them, those afflictions, onto the path. That kind of goes with this idea of suffering is not something you try to turn away from, because they are the friction, they are the vehicle for working with them. If you turn away from them and don't wish them upon you, as you know, you almost would say, like, if you want to get rid of them, why would you wish them upon you? That's the way to get rid of them. That's sort of the Zen paradox of how suffering existence can be transformed. So hopefully that makes some sort of sense to you. And I'm elaborating it here because, again, these two realms are sort of the toughest to deal with. And this happens often with people who do have severe addictive realities in their life, that they work intensely to conquer them, and they embrace them. Think of this 12-step program, both for narcotics, for people who have narcotic addictions and alcoholic addictions. And what is that usually followed by? It's usually followed by or accompanied by some sort of spiritual path. Think about the 12-step program is substantially anchored in a religious experience. It goes sort of hand in hand. So quite often I say spiritual practice accompanies somebody who does this kind of work. So you find this kind of work in religious practices. It's not unusual to find these sort of practices in, this course, that's on the wheel. It's about the Buddha's wheel of life. So in religion, in all types of religions, in all sorts of disciplines and practices like yoga, Buddhism, and many others, this is where you could find, practices and stabilize and deepen your own recognition of these mental states, and then work with them. Break the deep-rooted habitual patterns of constant karmic ripening behaviors in thought, speech, and actions. I wanted to point out that this isn't something unique to Buddhism. And again, it's not even religious. And again, that was part of what I wanted to underscore in this course. But quite often, people use the wisdom-filled techniques, specific, and I mean wisdom-filled techniques that are available to you in Christianity, in yoga, in Buddhism, in layman practices like 12-step program, but even those are usually accompanied by a religious or spiritual or reliance on a higher faith, on God sort of experience. So this is important. And then in terms of practices that are the most helpful to this problem and this challenge, this opportunity that I'm talking about here, David Nichtern, in his book, in the printed edition on page 77, I think it is, he has a very short, it's not even a meditation, he just has a suggested walkthrough of 3 different types of generosity practices you can do. One of the things that, if you're in these kinds of states that are hard to work with, being able to do what is most accessible to us. Usually, for most of us, it's easiest, not that it's easy, but it's easiest for us to turn towards giving in some way. And he talks about just even being able to do material giving is a way to open up space in the flow of your moment by moment emotional and mental experience to allow for the blindness sort of to subside. Think about it. If this realm is filled with craving, the opposite, something that could be an antidote to that, is giving, just giving. And so very practically, he talks about material giving being one of the most accessible ways. And then he also talks about developing generosity of fearlessness. If you can learn how to work with developing fearlessness, it is something that accompanies in generosity practice the actual action of giving that sort of supercharges it, and also then suppresses or stamps out or pushes to the side the emotional experience of craving or intense desire. That's not good intense desire, not the good kind. So, if any of you have read the text, you might wonder why he brought that up, meaning the idea of developing fearlessness as a practice. And then the last one he talks about, I'll grab the book. He talks about the generosity gift of Dharma. In Buddhism, a lot of you practice, and you all might know what Dharma is, but some of us maybe don't practice Buddhism and heard the word Dharma. But David Nichtern, it's interesting, he calls Dharma, he says, Dharma means seeing things clearly as they are. Well, first of all, Dharma is like all things. In Buddhism, we like to use the word phenomena, all phenomena. So it's all things and beings and things that manifest. And so what he's talking about there is something I've talked about in previous classes, which has to do with seeing the, let's say it this way, not misapprehending the true nature of things, one of the three root poisons. So seeing its true nature. And we won't go down that rabbit hole right at the moment because it will take too much time, but essentially this is how he defines it. It's the truth that we are fundamentally, here he's talking about that we're fundamentally good in whole, with a W, whole human beings. And all of us probably have layers of doubts and insecurities, he says. But at the root, at the core, we're basically good. Now he's talking about all things are good. All things. Think about that. He's not just, so that's like, sounds like a simple thing to say, but can we all buy into that? That's a pretty heavy duty thing to buy into. In Buddhism, we actually call that something very specific. We say that all sentient beings have what's called Buddha nature. And Buddha nature is a state of pure existence, a pure being beyond normal samsaric existence. But it's also inclusive of samsaric existence, but not in the way we experience it normally, which is through the lens of the three poisons, which then generate the negative and positive experience, which then generates the mental states of one or more of the six realms. So David talks about giving that gift in terms of generosity as well. First and foremost, giving it to yourself. Again, working with this kind of stuff is, you can end up beating yourself up or feeling bad about yourself. And that's not good. So you give yourself the gift of what he calls Dharma or Buddha nature or pure goodness that's at the heart of every being. And then you give that to all others as well. And there's a variety of meditation practices you can do in that regard. So just like, he does also talk about how you could use like mindfulness. We've talked about mindfulness and insight meditation practices before. And just like we might work with those and take on as the object, especially in insight meditation, some of the things we might identify as our own cravings. He also says it's really important to just work with what you're able to work with. So even if you can't get on the cushion, because these kinds, especially of negative mental states, are just, they kind of move I like to use the phrase, move your mind too much. So you can't even get settled and sit on the cushion where you could even bring them to mind. It's too difficult. You can do these practices, these generosity practices, on sort of a more, if you will, coarse level. Material giving, developing fearlessness in your activity of giving, and give that gift to yourself and to others. And then this sort of being good to yourself and recognizing, affirming, rejoicing that everyone has Buddha nature or has pure goodness inside of them. I don't want to go into that too much further because even that could be difficult and challenging for some of us. Some of us might have difficulty applying that to everybody if we stop and think about it. But that's part of what causes these negative states of mind. So there's a lot more I could say about this, including just a little bit more about if you're having difficulty getting on the cushion with some of these more difficult or challenging negative mental states, work with them in your waking state. Maybe get up in the morning and choose just one thing that you will do that is purposefully and with the intention to give to somebody, not just to do that. You might do that every day. You probably do. You're giving, but do it with the conscious intention that you're trying to develop and plant for yourself in your mind stream the future opportunity to be able to actually alleviate your own self-grasping cravings, specifically as we talk about this, and that it's an antidote for that. When your mind applies it that way, it will function that way in the way as a cause to ripen and result in that way. So this is like a skillful way to work with things we are just normally doing. Meditation is important, but it doesn't have to be on the cushion. I know lots of people in my life who they can't even meditate. Never mind about this kind of stuff. They just can't meditate. There's so much you can do, so much. You'll find that what that leads to is all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but by doing the work, you can do deeper meditation practices. So I'll come back to saying a little bit more about that when we get towards the end of talking about the next realm. But let me go on and talk about the next realm, which is the last one we'll talk about, but it's also the most challenging. So that's the hell realms. And of course, the visuals in there are something like out of Dante's Inferno. Not that all of you are familiar with that, but maybe some of you are, but Dante's Inferno is a classic text in Western literature that describes in detail all the levels of hell from a Christian cosmology experiential point of view. This is very similar. There are multiple realms of hell, and they all have all kinds of deep, leveled, layered meanings as it relates to these kind of mental states. You might remember somewhere earlier on, I talked about how the three poisons are the three root mental afflictions, but they're only three of, well, they're the most important, that's why we harp on them, but they're three of what are identified as 84,000 mental afflictions. So the hell realms have some aspect of all of those represented symbolically in all their different levels, just like Dante's Inferno does. So there's the hell realms, and there's what are the hot hell realms, and there's the cold hell realms, and they're very visual. And each one has a method where you're constantly in a repetitive, anguish, painful mental state, whereby, again, it's very graphic, where you're going through suffering, you're dying, and then you're being reborn, and then you're suffering, you're dying, you're being reborn, and it's just going on and on and on and on, and in a very intense way. If in the wheel cosmology, if we pull back, that's happening to us all the time. Maybe not as intense as that happens in the hell realms, but it's in some way we're experiencing, suffering, some sort of death, and then being reborn with all the possibilities that each one of those have available to us. What do we do with it? In the hell realm, here's the punchline: they can't do anything with it. There's the experience of suffering, dying, and rebirth is so fast and so constant that there's no space. is worse than the hungry ghost realm, because it isn't just in the context of desire and craving where you're overwhelmed and can never be satiated. It's like all the mental afflictions that exist are ever present, and not for every single one of us, each one of us who might end up in that mental state at any moment, have a particular one. But that's why there's so many visuals, just like in Dante's Inferno. They're symbolically meant to represent a lot of different, sort of difficult and challenging situations we could all be in. And all of these, just like all of our previous mental states, moment by moment, are the ripening effects of previously caused causes that came from our activities of body, speech, and mind. In particular, when you're talking about negative states of mind, you're talking about activities of non-virtuous quality. Well, these are the most heinous, they're the most severe in terms of partaking in those activities, whether it's killing or harming someone in some really overt and terrible, totally self-centered way, or doing something else to our realm of existence. Maybe you're somebody who is destroying the environment. That's a form of killing. There's so many ways that this can take place and can be going on right in front of your eyes. So it's really hard to see when we think about it in the classic, Dante or Buddha Wheel of Life context. But if we pull back, just like I did earlier in trying to say, pull back from the traditional graphic iconography and representation of the Buddha, the hell realms and the hungry ghost realms, you can see the mental states that might be happening, and you can see the emotional landscape of those mental states. They tend to make you feel, and these are the bellwethers to help, in case you might feel like you're in a hell at any given time. It's accompanied, the emotional state is you're accompanied by sort of a complete feeling of imprisonment. You just can't get out of it. You'll never be able to get out of it. It will never change. You might be experiencing another emotional quality on this landscape of the hell realm, is like having a terrifying fear. I'm sure all of us have at one time or another had that sensation of being terrified. And in the moment that it's happening, it's not going to end. You can't even imagine it ending. Luckily, we don't live in a hell realm permanently. None of us, I hope, feel that way. So it does end. But it's when you're experiencing it that we're talking about. You might be having on your emotional landscape the experience of silent rage. It might be hopelessness. So you can use some of those as objects to think about, and then maybe be aware of in terms of maybe doing this idea of either the book or a diary or noting for yourself on any given day one of these kinds of experience. When you see yourself or feel yourself experience something that's of one of those kind of emotional qualities, then you're probably having something that is in this realm happening in terms of what's ripening and manifesting and that you're going through. So anguish and fear and pain are relentless. A phrase might be that, we talk about that inner dialogue. Remember from one of the earlier classes, you might find yourself saying, everything's absolutely terrible because, fill in the blank. And it could be anything. But what's the key message, the subtext in everything is absolutely terrible? Everything is absolutely, meaning definitively, and you've applied some quality of absolute inherently, it's fixed, and also that it's terrible. That's a hell realm experience, okay? And again, I'll say it now that I've gone into it a little bit. All of us have them probably every day. Again, it's just hard to grasp them. And we probably try to push those away from our conscious horizon of conscious experience because they're the hardest to allow ourselves to feel connected to. So Nick Turn, again, talks about the mindset of this realm. And he says it's like you have feelings of aggression towards others coupled with disgust for yourself. So that's another bellwether to look for in what you might be feeling at any given moment. Aggression towards others coupled with disgust for ourselves. Other parts of this mindset to help you, like, make it tangible. Uncontrollable anger or depression. Anger can be explosive, or it could be behind a wall of silence. It doesn't have to be, it could be something that goes on inside of you. And it's always characterized by easily finding faults in others. It's a technique, an emotional technique to take your own experiences of really severe mental states, manifested through a certain emotional landscape. And because it's too hard to sort of deal with, you just push it off to somebody else. It's really them. It's really them. They're the ones that I find fault in. And when you find yourself doing that at any given time, and you can identify what it is you're saying they have a fault, you could probably turn to yourself and see that you are actually experiencing that fault and you're projecting it on others. I'm not trying to play Psychologist 101. These are pretty basic sorts of human experiences. So I'm not diving into any unknown territory here, but what this teaching is more about is identifying them in the wheel and then giving us some hope and some faith and some authoritative sources to point us in the right direction of how to work with them. It's actually a very practical, reality that we're trying to address here as far as talking about such things. So talking about antidotes, one of the things that is really important to develop here, especially with those last things I talked about, where we feel aggression towards others coupled with disgust for ourselves, is to try to work on some primer practices. And there are two that I'm going to quote right now, and they're really, really, really helpful. One of them is, let me find it here. This is a big book. Is the, I think it's the 7th verse. No, it's the 6th verse of the 8 verses on mind training again. Remember earlier I read the 3rd one that had to do with recognizing negative states of mind when they appear on your mental horizon. Well, this one is more applicable here to these severely negative mental states that happen in the hell realms. So here's the 6th verse from the 8 verses on mind training. Even if one whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hope gravely mistreats me in hurtful ways, I will train myself to view him as my sublime teacher. It's like, whoa. Normally, what would we do normally? I get chills when I read that because I've learned a lot from that verse myself. Normally, what we would do, if somebody, it's kind of like the mafia thing, like I was a big fan of the Godfather movies, and like Michael Corleone, when his brother Fredo, like basically, betrays the family. Michael Corleone, there's a scene there where he's at a public event with his brother Fredo, and he comes up to him and he kisses him, and then he grabs him on the side of the head and puts his mouth right next to his ear and goes, "You betrayed the family. You are dead to me." And then just sort of pushes him away and walks away. I mean, so I think most of us in some form, maybe not like Michael Corleone, if somebody gravely mistreated you in a hurtful way, I don't think we would, our first inclination would be to train yourself to view that person as your sublime teacher. But it goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier in the verse on that had to do with talking about how to bring mental afflictions onto the path. And I talked about them last class too, that you don't push them away. They're a blessing. They're the blessing of suffering. They're the grace of suffering that they do come to you is your golden opportunity in your own personal karmic ripening to work with it. So it's not like you take it on to beat the crap out of yourself or to be self-deprecating or to be, sadistic or, whatever some of those psychological states that people turn towards. Rather, you see them for what they really are, that they're not something that you should be finding faults in other, but they're a reflection of your own karmic ripening. Remember, dependent arising. Everything arises from your own karmic ripening in dependence on an object to interact with. Well, that object could be somebody who has hurt you. And they could therefore, and that actual event could be a great opportunity to learn. That's why the author of the 8 Verses on Mind Training says, let me view them as a sublime teacher. So that's one verse. The other verse that is helpful is one that comes from, let me see if I can find this one, sorry. It's a little longer, but it's a primer to like some of the practices I've already encouraged you to do, which is, and David Nichtern talks about it in the meditation that we're going to talk about at the end of talking about this section on this realm. It has to do with developing the ability to see all sentient beings as precious and worthy of your love, your loving kindness. So this particular verse, it's not a verse, it's actually a paragraph, comes from another famous Buddhist master from the Mind Training Manual called Atisha's 7-point Mind Training. And it is actually the 3rd point in that training where he goes, cultivating loving kindness towards sentient beings. And you'll see why I'm talking about loving kindness here, because the antidote to the severe mental afflictive states in this hell realm is the practice of loving kindness. And this is really a great exercise to do. So here it is. Bear with me for a second. First, visualize your real life mother in front of you and reflect, quote, her kindness towards me has been extremely great. For instance, by offering her own body to conceive me, she has placed me among the ranks of the humans. While I was in her womb for 9 months, approaching 10, she nurtured me with loving and kind thoughts, with the wish, quote, may my child be unexcelled by anyone. She had all kinds of activities undertaken for my sake. Divinations performed, charms made, clay imprints. Of course, this is an older text, from centuries ago, of sacred images constructed, water offerings made, sacred scriptures. You get the idea. She did all this great stuff for with the intention to benefit you. Even when I was a newborn, merely the size of my hand, a bundle of hair and wrinkles so fragile that it left unattended for a single moment, the duration of a finger snap, it could have proved fatal. She protected me, her child, from death. She drew me close to her warm flesh, cleaned my waist away with her hand, broke my food by chewing it and wiping my runny nose with her tongue. She took great care, great joy in me, and she did so as I grew bigger as a child into a full person. I became able to eat my own work, to eat on my own and to call my parents by their names. And he goes on with this long description of all the things that his mother did for him as he went all the way through life. You could get the tenor of the reading. It's about 3 or 4 more paragraphs. but I'll move towards the end of it. I'll pick it up where he says, she worried when I was away, even for a day. This kind of mother who has helped me in so many ways and fought harms in so many ways on my behalf has been indeed a great embodiment of kindness. So Atisha says, reflect in this manner until tears flow from your eyes and hair stands up from the pores of your body. So he's saying that this should be a deeply felt experience that you have when you do this reflection. He then says, again, reflect. How can I benefit my kind mother? How can I make her achieve happiness? Here's the punchline. Extend the same thought to your fellow practitioners, your family, and then extend it further to your neighbors, and then to all sentient beings you've ever seen or imagined. Then extend the contemplation to beings of all 6 realms, these realms we're talking about, wherever space pervades. If the force of your loving kindness is weak, engage in this contemplation individually towards the beings of each of the 6 classes until loving kindness towards all of them arises. It has been stated in the Great Nirvana Sutra. Quote, even if you were to count beads the size of Kalasita nuts, those are like endless, the earth will fail to measure the extent of your mothers. So I think you get the idea here. Atisha's meditation practice, as this is just one part of his 7-point mind training meditation, is to transform your mental experience of every one of them into one that you would feel this way towards, your most perfect mother. And maybe your mother wasn't the most perfect. That isn't the point. It's really what a mother represents in his words, which is why his meditation is perfect. And it takes everything for me to read that. And then when he tells you should be crying and hair stand on, and it takes everything for me not to do that. So I think I made it through. It's helped me quite a bit, specifically in removing the propensity to find fault in others, to judge others, to have aggression towards others. Well, this is why I brought up that verse from the 8 trainings and the 8 verses in mind training, and this verse from Atisha's 7-limb mind training practice, because it goes right to exercising, to practicing something that moves your mind away from that incessant, as it's experienced in the hell realm, where there's no room to even breathe and to contemplate and to think. When you're not in that state of mind, doing this kind of meditation practice with the conscious intent that you're skillfully moving your mind to this place so that when those sorts of severe negative mental afflictions arise, they will possibly not arise, possibly lessen, and possibly be gone eventually. So you see, it's a very practical approach to working with these sorts of severe afflictions. So another characteristic in this realm to be on the lookout for is if you ever find yourself having the experience of wanting to seek revenge. It could be the littlest thing, but anytime you seek revenge for anything, you're partaking in a severe, like one of those negative mental activities that are sort of under the umbrella of killing, causing harm to others. And that's the one that really projects you into this in a future sense, projects you karmically into this sort of mental, negative mental state. So revenge is another one to look for, and then work with it if you ever find yourself feeling that sense of revenge. And then the other thing to always be looking out for here, you can tell, like in the hell realm, there's always sort of like two sides to the coin. As I said earlier, like if you have feelings of aggression towards others, it's usually coupled with disgust for yourself. Well, sort of like when we think about the inner psychology, again, David Nichtern talks about the psychology. I like to say the inner psychology, the emotional framework for these kinds of experiences, that we tend to have our inner dialogue turn to an inner narrative when we are being aggressive or angry, or having really aggressive negative emotional experiences, especially towards others. It's usually accompanied by, quote, having like self, ridicule, or resentment for yourself. So David uses probably the most simple two words you could use to describe that. And he says, quote, "I suck." And, that's obviously self-loathing. That could take any kind of form. It doesn't have to be like uttering the inner narrative of "I suck." It could be like, "I can't get out of bed today." That could be, and it could lead to all kinds of really negative mental states like severe depression, severe anxiety, where you're paralyzed. So sort of to wrap up, sort of talking about the mindset of the hell realm, it's the polar opposite of the God realm. If we remember the God realm being pure pleasure, blissed out, never having any kind of pain. Well, the hell realm's the opposite. In the God realm, everything's great. It's always high, like I said, blissful, beautiful. Here, everything's really low. Everything's terrible. Life's ugly. So I think, again, any one of us could stop where we have moments during any day, maybe not any day, where we think life is ugly in some way, or terrible. And the way that we're thinking it's terrible or ugly, we don't see how it could change in that particular way. That is a hell realm experience. I'm just trying to point out that there's many ways that we could experience hell realm mental states, and it doesn't have to be the most severe form like we talked about earlier. So, you could do an exercise like, I'm doing fill in the blank for this one. Before it was like everything's absolutely terrible because, right? Well, this one, I basically use David's two words, "I suck because." You could do an exercise where you might not be feeling it, and hopefully you're not when you're doing the exercise. That'd probably be bad, but use your reflection, your ability to reflect, and think about some of these characteristics, these mindsets that I've shared with you. Yeah, I felt that way when, and then you sort of take note of that. And you're not just doing that to do that. That's then what you work on with that idea of bringing your mental afflictions into meditation practices and transforming them through loving. In this case, the antidote for meditation wise is loving kindness. So of course that would be applied to yourself. Which we've learned, hopefully those who've heard the previous courses, I talk a lot about being, and in earlier this class, talking about being kind and gentle and loving to yourself. So this is, so as far as the problem goes, to talk about how David Nichtern frames out each one of the realms, the problem is you just can't see any possibility of things changing. So the traditional image is like repeated death, rebirth, we talked about that. But if you ever are able to have a clear mind to identify any moment where you can't see the possibility of something changing, that, capture the moment. That's what I'm encouraging you to do. That's because there's something going on there that is of the nature of mental afflictive arisings, that's of the nature of the hell realm. So it doesn't have to be as severe as contemplating, actual violence or murder, suicide, extreme solutions for impossible problems. We're not talking about that. It's just any kind of really negative emotion that you can't see it leading to anything but negative expectations and can't lead to anything but negative outcome. This is the cycle that we're trying to break. That's what we're trying to break. When we have hell realm mental state, occurrences. So, again, if you ever find yourself not being able to see a fresh start to something or finding a resolution to something, that comes from this realm. So examples here could be, again, to fill in the blank game I'm playing today. Quote, nothing / my situations will ever change because. So if you could do that exercise and you find yourself filling that in with anything, good. Rejoice in that. Remember, just the ability to do that is something that you should rejoice in. We have no, so I talked about these before, feelings of hopelessness, despair. That's what prevents us from understanding these intense experiences the way I'm trying to point out that we can. So our view of impermanence, for example, is completely obstructed. We solidify everything. Everything's fixed. Everything has an inherent quality that cannot be changed. And as we know, as I've taught us earlier, or I've alluded to, I haven't been teaching a class on emptiness or the true nature of reality, but I've talked enough about it that that's the misapprehension, that's the ignorance, that's the root poison of the three poisons. Fixing something inherently to everything that it can't change. So that's what's really like fully obstructed here in the hell realms, and that's what you get the opportunity to work with if you're able to rouse yourself is the words that David Nichtern uses. He talks about rousing yourself enough just to recognize that you've fallen under the sway of one of these particular negative states of mind. And again, then you start to, record them, if you will. I encourage that only and I haven't done that before, as we talked about the other realms in the other classes, because it's easier to do. But for these realms, it's harder. At least I found it very helpful for myself to do that, and then to work with them. So that's the opportunity. The opportunity is to rouse yourself. But how do you do that if it's constant, right? That's what we're talking about here. Well, for us that aren't, for all of us that are not looking at this wheel, representation of the wheel as a traditional one where we're born literally through a reincarnation process of being reborn, like in the hell realm. More it's like a moment by moment, day by day state of mind, a mental afflictive state. You're probably not in it all the time. So if you're not, then when you're not, that's what I'm alluding to. That's when you do that reflective process. But the main thing to do here, and this is why I read the exercise on training yourself to experience every sentient being as your own mother, in the way Atisha talks about, is to develop empathy for all other sentient beings. But you do it in a very specific way. When you're able to recognize one of your own hell realm mental states that I've been blabbering on about, don't just identify it and look at how you could utilize working with it for yourself, but immediately develop the intention to use that awareness, that insight, as they say in psychology, to use it for the benefit of helping all other sentient beings. It goes back to using that wing of practice, which is called compassion. It's the only ticket in your mental flow, and specifically the type here that we'll talk about when we get to talking about the meditation practice is loving kindness. It's what opens up space of that constant flow of the kind of severe negative emotions that are present in the hell realm, where you can break. Remember, I talked about breaking that cycle of negative emotions, negative expectations, negative outcomes. So it's really like getting down there and doing the work again. when you discover this, what, not to make a pun, what the hell do you do with it? I did make a pun. That's a bad pun. Sorry. So examples here could be for an exercise, again, fill in the blank exercise that we're doing today, could be, I understand how you feel, fill in the blank, about that, da, 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 because I have felt the same thing myself. I have felt the same thing myself. And then use that to motivate your own loving kindness that you would then take on the cushion in your meditation practice, and even bringing it out beyond the meditation cushion. So I think that's a good exercise to do. So you're using your own intense emotional experiences of like anger or hatred or depression or any of the other characteristics I shared with you about this realm earlier to reach a deeper truth about all living beings. And it's basically this, that none of us are immune from these negative mental afflictive states. We wouldn't be here otherwise. And let that lead you to that awareness, lead you to being able to say with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama says all the time, that all sentient beings just want to end their suffering and to achieve a state of happiness. And let that be what motivates you to break that cycle. This is the hardest cycle to break. And again, not that it's always present, could be for you, but it's there. And if it keeps coming back, and that could be what we're talking about. It could be coming back like every day, or could be coming back once a week, might come back randomly, but you want to get rid of it. Do what the mind training verse says, bring it on. I'm going to turn to it. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to experience it, but I'm going to know how to work with it. And then doing some of those kind of exercises like the 8 verses in mind training, or Atisha's teaching on seeing all others as your mother. So you're using your own worst experiences to regain some perspective that you've lost. Essentially, you're looking to reconnect with and access, positive mental states. So it's tough to do. It's a lot more I could say about that, but what it really gets us to is, what is the practice that we can do? So the practice that can really open up that space for us, accommodate feelings of gentleness, appreciation, and kindness, both towards ourselves and others, is what David Nichtern in his book calls the well of loving kindness. Think of a well, that you drop the bucket down into, and you get that nourishing, absolutely necessary, pure water that rekindles your spirit and your body. So this is what type of meditation practice you want to do to alleviate these sorts of negative states of mind. And it's present in all of us. It goes back to what I talked about earlier, that we're all essentially good. David talked about the Dharma of all things, that everything is good. I talk about it being Buddha nature, that it's something that we can tap. It's there, even for beings that are experiencing these severe negative mental afflictions. And in Buddhism, we have these practices exist to allow us to get to these hardest, most deeply rooted mental afflictions. And in certain practices, we call it reaching our most very subtle mind, that which is cleansed of having the veil of those 3 poisons, of really being able to do what Master Atisha says of experiencing all beings as our mother. Punchline, in their true nature. They're not inherently fixed, that they are only as I label them. And it could be a totally blissful experience, a very happy experience, because it's one that's rooted in their, experience them truly as they are. So, there's more I can share with you in terms of where loving kindness meditation comes from, but I will just say that, a couple things. matri is a Sanskrit word, metta in Pali, and in English, they mean loving kindness. And it's a really important practice that comes out of the East, Eastern traditions, including yoga. And in Buddhism, Maitreya, in Sanskrit again, or Medaya and Pali, they're regarded as a personification of loving kindness as the future Buddha of our world in Buddhist cosmology. And it's a beautiful thing. He's in our Buddhist tradition. Maitreya is the Bodhisattva who's going to appear on earth in the future and achieve complete enlightenment, like Buddha Shakyamuni did, and teach us pure Dharma, the pure Dharma of loving kindness. And Maitreya, from a Buddhist point of view, as a bodhisattva, takes form innumerably, incalculably throughout all of existence to help all sentient beings. So there's always help there for us if we want to turn towards that in our tradition. In our tradition, it's all the Buddhas, but Maitreya specifically, His Holiness the Dalai Lama also represents spiritually loving kindness, the spirit of loving kindness. He's thought of as a reincarnation. That's why he's called the 14th Dalai Lama. He's thought of as the reincarnation of the Buddha of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of loving kindness. The female aspect of that Buddha of loving kindness is known as Tara. You know, in other traditions, from a Buddhist point of view, we see Hierophant in ancient Egypt as a similar manifestation of Maitreya. In Hindu, Krishna, Christ during his ministry as Jesus. So in terms of personification, we see loving kindness as the pure embodiment manifested, you know, through each one of these entities, if you will, all of them being you know, the ultimate reality, if you will, but manifested. So, you know, that's all. It's like sort of inspirational chatter to say that if any of my talking here today about so much about these severe negative mental afflictions, like in the hungry ghost realm and the hell realms, is sort of overwhelming. There's teachings like the wheel. There's training activities like in the mind training exercises. There's great teachers like the ones we have in our tradition, and as I talked about earlier, in all these other traditions. You just got to turn to the one that feels like you can work with and make some progress. The key is to turn to something and try to work with it. That's my encouragement, you know, for you today. So I'll leave it there because, as usual, I have too much more that I could go into, but I want to leave time for a couple of questions. Hopefully, there's some. So let me just see if there were any questions that came in. Well, there's more of like a comment when I was talking about when someone feels like emotionally overwhelmed, and it's something that's just not controlled. You know, the one person wrote in and said, like when we have panic attacks. Well, you know, definitely that can be a manifestation of that. So another question came in. Can you tell me where the mother practice can be found? It was beautiful. So yeah, it's probably found in, I'm always holding up, well, recently I've been holding up this text, the mind training, the Great Collection. It's a translated edition by Thupten Jinpa. We all know him as the translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It's published by Wisdom Publishing. It's one of the secondary texts that I recommended we use people who are really interested in maybe developing practices. It's a great toolbox of meditation practices that can be prescribed, like I've been loosely doing during all these teachings, to what we're talking about, so that we can actually work with what we're talking about here, not just learning about it. And the specific teaching that's in this book, and like I said, it could probably be found elsewhere, is called Atisha's 7-point mind training. It's a famous mind training practice, and I guarantee you, if you just Google it, you will find at least a handful of translations just of this text. It's not very long. It's probably not even 10 pages long. It's 7 points of mind training, and the one I read you was the third one. So I went right to it because it had purpose. And that's something you can always do as well, is take practices in part that apply to what you're doing. If you get familiar with them, and you can start to prescribe for yourself, so to speak. But I've been working with this book, for example, for years, and it really is, it's like a medicine chest. Some of them probably would not be good medicine to take if you didn't understand like the context very well. Always put meditation practices into context. That's important. So anyway, that's where that comes from. Berto asks, what's the names of the books, the book you were talking about? So I don't know, Berto, if you were asking the question that I just answered about this book, but the other books that are the main text for this class, and the one I was using the most for this particular session, is this book called Awakening from the Daydream. It's by David Nichtern, Nicchtern, and it's a wonderful contemporary interpretation. David's personal insight based on his experience and his teachings that he's learned from his master, applied to the Wheel of Life. And the other main text we're using as well, although I didn't reference it in this class today, I did last week, is called The Wheel of Life, which is subtitled Buddhist Perspectives on Cause and Effect, and that's by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Okay, question, is there anything other than offering loving kindness that you could do to help someone who has suffered their entire life in the hell realm? Yeah, there's plenty that you can do. The main thing that we've been talking about here, in terms of frame of reference, in terms of where you put your center of gravity, your compass, is I've been talking to you today in every class that we've had in this course about what you can do to work with your own hell realm mental states or mental afflictive experiences. They're prescriptive for you as somebody who's attending this class. In terms of using your own methods, meditative methods and practices, and even activities that you can do for people who are suffering in the hell realms, there's a whole variety of different practices you can do. We've covered a few of them previously, because from a Buddhist point of view, everything starts, one of them is Tonglen. From a Buddhist point of view, everything is dependent arising. So you, as the person asking that question, you are seeing someone in your, who's been in the, to quote you, suffering their entire life in the hell realm, end quote. So that experience is dependent on you seeing them and experiencing them that way. So the practices on the cushion are always about transformation, doing practices that transforms their sufferings, dissolving their sufferings on the most subtle level that you can, working from your side. So for example, Tonglen is a practice that as you're doing that, and if you remember when we were doing that practice, and you may be familiar with it already, as you identify the suffering of a person out there and you bring it into you. Remember, I talked about the important ingredient of generating the heart of loving kindness and compassion that is translucent, bright, powerful, and anything of darkness, negative mental afflictions that you bring in from that outside entity and touch it, they dissolve. And that's working in the most powerful way with that type of person, in the sense that you are literally helping them to dissolve those experiences. But the difficult thing in looking at this is that we normally think about helping people where you can, let's say, reach in right now and grab them and pull them out of, fill in the blank. In this case, we're talking about the hell realm. And there are things you can do. Great examples of people who function on that level, like, for example, Mother Teresa or Gandhi. Not that they didn't function on other levels, but they operated on that level. But the most powerful practices you can do are doing those kind of practices, which are planting the fundamental dependent arising experience between you and that person for future, especially if at the end you dedicate any practice like that you do to their future well-being, where they're totally alleviated from those suffering experiences and those negative mental afflictions. As you took them in and you dissolve them, you're creating a karmic relationship between yourself and them, so that in the future you can access them, and you could access them in a way that would be powerful, just like that practice is powerful. So these kinds of practices are not immediately satisfying in that way, unless you're able to understand and always look and be mindful of how these practices have to be viewed through the lens of karmic ripening and the laws of karma. What you do now with activity of body, speech, and mind is going to ripen in the future and be, that's one law. And one is that it's going to be a lot more powerful and stronger than the original seed planted, i.e. an oak, a chestnut turning into an oak tree. And that if you imbue it with your motivation and intent, the way I was just describing, it then creates that condition for powerful help and assistance that you can give them that goes beyond any measure of an ordinary type. There's nothing wrong with ordinary type of helping, like Mother Teresa or Gandhi or many others. I think of people who work at food kitchens and all kinds of things that they do. It's wonderful. And not to be dismissive of those, but we're talking about accessing here powerful practices for yourself and others. And it all goes back to dependent arising, and everything is dependent arising. And what can you be doing with dependent arising experiences that are most beneficial ultimately for yourself and that other person? It might not be immediately gratifying because you can't pull somebody out or help them out of the hell realms in a direct, obvious, normal way that we're used to. But that's part of why we study these practices, because they try to get our mind and our understanding on another track. So hopefully that's helpful. It's not something that is easy to talk about. It's almost like a whole nother course to talk about that, if you will.
John?
Yeah.
Hi. Just wanted to say thank you very much for this class. It's been really refreshing to hear the teachings from a Westerner. We all greatly appreciate Rinpoche and DNKO, but it is both fun and entertaining and enlightening. Check all the boxes. So I just want to say thank you very much for what you're doing. Also, you've encouraged me to order all 3 of those books, which have been on my list, but I've been sort of sidetracked with Rinpoche Dzgar Kongtrul. I'm probably pronouncing his name incorrectly, but he's just, again, has a way of teaching that, speaks to the Western mind. So I would like to make a request. you've alluded to impermanence, misapprehension, and have talked about how, it's sort of a class unto itself. And so therefore, I would like to propose a request that perhaps in the future, that might be a topic that you might consider bestowing on all of us. Emptiness is a big topic, and I, for one, and I think I can speak for others, would be deeply appreciative if you would perhaps consider that. And the last thing I just wanted to add was, I remember a teaching that Rinpoche did, and he was talking about Tonglen, and Art was translating for him and added a piece to that I had not heard, and it always sticks with me. And it's like when we're breathing in that darkness, that we're also simultaneously imploding the ego. And that was just a ginormous puzzle piece for me. So I just wanted to share that. And I'm gonna mute myself and just wanted to say thank you. Thank you, deeply thank you.
Well, thank you for everything you said. And I will definitely talk to Geshe-la and Rinpoche about maybe doing, about your request, that one that you made. It's always been my intent ever since I became a student of theirs that somewhere down the road, and some of my friends at DNK know this, like Gloria knows this, and some other people know this, that I might find a way to do something either by writing and or teaching that was complementary to or amplifies or presents in a certain way the teachings, their teachings, the teachings of the masters that bring it to just presented in a way that maybe I know experientially that if I was able to access them in that way, and then as I eventually did access some of these teachings, I'm sharing with you the way I experienced them. I'm a Westerner, and that point, the one last thing, the point about Art, for those of you who don't know who Art Engels is an amazing Buddhist scholar who lives in New Jersey here, in Howell, New Jersey, was a incredibly dedicated student to Ken Rinpoche, the great Lama who passed almost 20 years ago. And he's taken over the reins of holding that Dharma Center together in Howell, New Jersey. And I encourage people to go there if they have the opportunity. He's a wonderful teacher. He also serves often when the opportunity presents itself on certain teachings to be a translator for our Rinpoche, for Ken Rinpoche, for Gyerma Khenso Rinpoche. And so that comment that he had added, if you will, to the Tonglen practice is a beautiful one. It all goes to the nature of what we're talking about here today, which is using Tonglen to, Tonglen, you could explain what's actually going on so many levels. But as he was talking about that, it is that sort of explosion or dissolving of the ego is directly connected to letting go of self-grasping, one of the three main three poisons that are in the center of the wheel, just to bring this back to the wheel. So it's a beautiful thing that you brought that up because it's totally appropriate. So let me just try to squeeze in a few other questions. Is there a source of the goodness that is attributed to all beings? That's a great question. There's lots of big, giant books like this written about that topic, and from a Buddhist point of view. And so in Buddhist cosmology, it's said like this, that all sentient beings have been here. Where's here is interesting to talk about, but have been here since beginningless time. So one could say that maybe that's beyond time and space and beyond conception. So even then to talk about it, as soon as we start talking about it, we're conceptualizing it, right? But as we bring that idea of the source of goodness into the realm of conception, from a Buddhist point of view, it is the essence of what's called in Buddhism Dharmakaya. Dharmakaya is being in a state of your pure form, and with no obstructions, no obstacles to omniscience, no mental afflictions, no karmic ripening that's all long ago been dissolved. And the Dharmakaya is present in each one of us, always has been, because it's our true nature. So they talk about that from a Buddhist point of view of calling it Buddha nature. That's why it's called Buddha nature. Buddha is an enlightened being, an omniscient being, one who's realized the Dharmakaya state, and that's in us, and that is who we are. We just don't see it. We never see it. Moment by moment, it's the veil of the three poisons and what pours forth from there in the movement of our mind into either positive or negative activities. So it's beyond conception, and it's our true self. That might be the simplest way to put it. I put a little bit too many words on it. We could talk about that like a lot.
There's no source.
Well, the source is that it's there. It doesn't come from anything. It's always been there since, when the phrase "since beginningless time" from a Buddhist cosmology point of view infers that, beyond time and space and conception, that it's never like, there's no Big Bang. There is a Big Bang, but that's not like when life started, et cetera, et cetera. It's like always been there. So I think from a Christian point of view, you could equate it to being that it's like, as we're in samsara, we're not in union with God. But when we're able to do these kind of Buddhist practices, we can do them in a way, they're structured in a way that they bring us fully back in union with God. I would say that might be a fair way to put it from, and I'm speaking of God as a quality, not as an entity, meaning Buddha nature, the Dharmakaya, because anything we say, once I start talking beyond that, it becomes conceptualized, and the Dharmakaya is beyond conception. I think God's beyond conception too. And I think we conceptualize it as like a persona, just like I was talking about Maitreya, et cetera, Krishna, et cetera. So yeah, I'm a real ecumenist. I think you know that, Rachel. So that's how I see it. And it is consistent though with the way I think the Buddhist scriptures teach it. We could talk more about that. Another question is, what do you mean by access them? Yeah. So I went by that too quickly because I started getting cognizant of time moving too quickly, because I really go on too long. What I was talking about was accessing them. I didn't identify them. I'm really talking about right there. I was talking about all of the negative mental states or afflictions that are present to us when we're experiencing the hell realms. They don't allow for any access to positive qualities, positive mental states. That's what it means to be in hell. It's like one is perceiving that nothing can change, nothing can be better, nothing can improve. Like some of those practice questions. And so when I said access, I was specifically talking about using loving kindness in this really sort of trickster way. What I said at that point in the discussion was you look to access kindness which is the most positive dimension of the human heart and experience, by relating, looking at your own hellish mental states. And then, as David Nichtern talked about it, like finding a way to just turn that, especially if you're not in that state at that moment, you're probably more capable of doing it. You're able to then take your own negative severe mental states and put it towards acknowledging and realizing that all sentient beings have those emotions and feelings, and you create that space. That's what you're accessing to move into that, sort of turning it on its head, playing tricks with your own mental afflictions and relating it to others, and thereby creating empathy. And it's part of that goes hand in hand with loving kindness, specifically loving kindness meditation practices. So I kind of left out there, I was a little vague about accessing them. What do we're accessing better, more positive mental states of existence by utilizing that sort of loving kindness practice. Hopefully that helps. You further asked a question, can we repair our karma in a relationship without being in physical context? Absolutely. It depending on the karmic relationship, it could happen instantly. It could take years. It could take like some serendipitous route that you're not aware of. All you can do is do loving kindness practices for yourself, with yourself, in connection with, maybe, like I'm going to talk again about Tonglen practice, but also with others that are in your life right now who might be similar or not, in terms of that relationship you had, where you use your motivation and intent while you're doing certain loving, kind, generous activities with them, or thoughts or actions of speech towards them, and dedicate them to the future well-being of that person, first and foremost, who you need to repair a relationship with, but then also extend that dedication of that intention of action, speech, or mind to your specific relationship with that person, not just their future well-being, but yours with them. And that, the amount of time that takes, again, it's key in the word you use, which is karma. Karma takes time to ripen. And I don't know if you were in the class, Bernadette, that I talked about, like using, I use the analogy of an air traffic controller controlling airplanes landing, and then where they go, either they deboard, and that's the ripening of karma, or you direct them into an airplane hangar and close the door, where you basically can shut down that negative karma. I don't want to go into all that again, but I talked a little bit about that in that, because there are very skillful ways we can work with our karma in meditation, and then also in our actions and speech. And it's all about motivation and intent, and then what we're doing with that. The more the motivation and intent is for the benefit of others, and then you have a cognizant, you do it in the form, we call it in Buddhism, doing a dedication. It doesn't have to be on the cushion. It could be like you just did an action. Then you buy somebody a coffee. I was at I was at the bagel store back on Valentine's Day, and I went to get bagels for my wife and I. And I got up real early, I want them to be on the table before she got up, before I took the dogs out. And then I was there. I ordered the bagels. They're in the bag. I got some cream cheese, and then I reached in my pocket. I had no money. And a lot of bagel places, you get to pay cash. So I had my wallet. I couldn't pay, and it was like it was like $18 the whole thing, because I bought too many bagels. I bought the cream cheese was too much. I always buy too much. The bagels would last for a year. I had to freeze them. So I said, well, I'll have to run home. I'll come back. I turn around, and there's this guy standing behind me. He goes, here. He hands me a $20 bill and says, I'll pay for it. I never saw this guy in my life. And I thanked him and I said, "Are you sure?" Because I didn't want to go home, come back. I was being self-centered. And he said, "Absolutely." So, I went after him and I saw him. He got in his truck and he was like a guy who worked for like an electrician or an air conditioning repair company, and he was headed to a job, or going home. I don't know where he was going. I think he was going out on an emergency job because it was Valentine's Day. It was a Sunday. So I put myself in his shoes, and first I said, "You can do this too." It's a whole nother practice, but it's kind of connected to Tonglen, where I I I imagined him being a bodhisattva and helping me very little way, but by sharing with me the act of generosity, he opened me up to creating how universal we really need to work on making our practice of generosity, and that he was like laughing with joy, because he's just a bodhisattva driving an electrician's truck, um, and I really experienced him that way, and it's incredible. That's why I can remember. It's just incredible. So like, it's all about how you experience something. If you can use these kind of teachings and other practices to create, what you experience, because karmic ripening is nothing more than moment by moment planting of seeds that are going on constantly as your mind is moving, and our minds are always moving. So what are you doing with your mind? That's why you want to do these kind of meditation practices. Sorry, the bagel story was a little weird. I apologize. Let's see. Last question. Can you use Tonglen with one who has passed? Yes, you can. From a Buddhist point of view, somebody passing is like a door. They don't end in terms of we could talk a lot about like what that means really, but I'll just say they don't end. And just because that door is solid to us, meaning death, and it closed behind us, behind them and in front of us, it doesn't mean that you can't do. One of the beautiful things about Tonglen practice and all practices are that they transcend time and space. They transcend life and death. You have to have the mind. You should feel blessed. It goes back to that being blessed that you are actually in the human realm and you can do these practices. You can take them to ends of existence. And in some practices that we learn in Buddhism, we do that with light, working with light, identifying the light being of a certain quality, empty and compassionate light. We send it to the entire universe. Light's really important in Buddhist practice. And what's riding on that light? Remember the rider and the horse in terms of mind and body and wisdom and compassion. It's very powerful. So like you try to drop your conceptions of death. Not that you have these, but if you do, you could drop your conception of death being a barrier that's impenetrable. And it has real purpose. Tonglen is as much about benefiting yourself and the other or others that you're doing Tonglen practice with in the here and now, but it's even more from a karmic ripening point of view, even more powerful and productive to help them, whether in relationship to yourself and or others, or for themselves, the person who's passed, in that way. There's many other practices you can do with somebody who's passed that utilize the help that's available to us. I talk about bodhisattvas, like the guy who's the electrician, but seriously, bodhisattvas are like Maitreya. He's everywhere, and you can work with Maitreya's practices. You can work with Tara, green Tara, white Tara practices. But those are things that get into the sort of the Buddhist realm, which go beyond the scope of where I want to go with this class anyway. So hopefully those questions were some. I know every time, especially when you're in a Zoom thing, it's like none of the answers ever answer anything completely. We can have like a whole discussion around each one of those. We're past our time. So here's what I'd like to propose. let's end the class now, and we'll start the next class, which, by the way, is not next week. I think it's the week after. Can't be next week because I'm not even going to be here. Pretty sure it's the week after.
2 weeks from now, John. You're right.
Okay, good. Let's start that with a meditation practice on loving kindness, and we'll give proper time rather than doing something quick like I always end up doing because of my going on too long. So that way, that's an antidote to that. I'll do it at the beginning. Does that sound okay? Great. So Gloria, you got the recording covered, right?
Yes, I do.
Great. So thanks everybody again. And you're also wonderful to allow me to talk about such important topics, and hopefully there's some help and benefit that you get from some of this, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so
Till
much.
next time.
John.
Thank
Okay.
you so much.
Thanks, John.